Okay, so we are now going to begin a discussion about how our county works to maintain and create a harassment-free workplace so that all of our employees and our residents know that harassment is not an acceptable behavior, that we want everyone in our workplace to be able to give it their all and to feel that they are valued. And we want, as a county government, to be able to get the benefit of everyone's contributions. And when you have workplaces that are not conducive to everyone making full contributions and treating one another respectfully, that deteriorates and damages the services that we provide to the community. And we are particularly concerned when we hear reports of any type of inappropriate behavior in county facilities. And the council has an oversight role to play. So today's discussion is a discussion like other legislative bodies may have around the country, where we, working with our able staff, have reached out to all county agencies, not only the county government, but also the public schools, the college, park and planning, WSSC, HOC, and the Revenue Authority. And we've asked them to share with us how they approach these issues, what their procedures are, and how they are working to create the workforce of the future that, understands the community and, again, is a place where everyone feels that they can give it their all. So an overview of each agency's response is included in the packet. And I will say that those are, comprehensive responses in many cases. And we will not have time to go through each of those responses in detail. It's going to be more of a high-level discussion. But then the committees will proceed to take up some more detailed discussions in the coming weeks. And I'll just note that while the focus of today's discussion is on workplace harassment, which is fundamentally an issue between adults, the Education Committee has scheduled a discussion on MCPS's child abuse and neglect policies on April 25th. Appreciate the committee for working on that. Now, given the number of people involved, we're going to organize the discussion today by dividing the agencies up into two panels. Each agency in the panel will provide a short verbal summary of their workplace, harassment policies and procedures, and then council members will have an opportunity to ask questions. So I'll ask council members to hold their questions until each of the agencies in the panel have presented. And before we invite the panels up, I'll turn it to council staff to talk a little bit more about how we are approaching our oversight role. Thank you, Craig Howard.
Great. Well, you've covered most of the key highlights, Mr. President. We did ask each of the agencies to provide information ahead of time about their policies and procedures regarding workplace harassment. And as you mentioned, a summary of those responses are in the packet. There's also a large amount of information that we included on the website. Some of the the submittals by the agencies were hundreds of pages long, and so we put all the information online so folks can access that and see some of the specific wording of the policies and procedures across the different agencies. We've asked each agency to be prepared to just give a high-level summary of their policies and procedures to the council today, and then they'll be prepared to answer any questions that individual council members may have about their specific policies and procedures. And then, as you mentioned, if there's follow-up issues or questions, we can take those up at a future session or at the individual committee level, depending on what the issue may be.
And I just overheard some of my council member colleagues asking, a individual department, these issues could be discussed by the committee that oversees that department. OHR itself is overseen by GO, so GO has a look into OHR's practices, but committees may also take up individual departments as well.
Correct.
Is
Yeah,
that
we've
right?
asked OHR to speak generally about the
Right.
practices and policies for the entire county government.
Right.
If there are specific issues related to individual departments, that would be the subject of a follow-up work session.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we will call our first panel, and that is Montgomery County Government. We're inviting Sean Stokes, who's Director of OHR, and Angela Washington, Director of our Equal Employment Opportunities Office at OHR. The Revenue Authority, we've got Keith Miller, the CEO, Michael Boone, the CFO. And we have the Housing Opportunities Commission. We have Louis Cheney, Patrick Mattingly, Huweta Johannes, and we have WSSC, Monica Johnson and Donald King. Okay, so we will proceed in that order, which is the county government, followed by Revenue Authority, followed by HSC, followed by WSSC. And we will ask each agency to limit its presentation to 5 minutes at the most. And there will be plenty of discussion, I'm sure, so, don't worry that you won't get a chance to speak to the issues. And again, my colleagues, if possible, to hold their questions or comments until all the presentations are complete. And Ms. Stokes.
Good morning. Can you hear me? I don't know if is it on?
Right again, and Mr. Miller, if you could turn yours off. Yeah. As you proceed, after you're finished with your remarks, please do turn off the mic.
Okay, so red is on. I thought red is off, sorry. Good morning, Council President Reamer, members of the County Council, and invited partners and guests. I'm Sean Stokes. I'm the Director for the Office of Human Resources. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today to speak on behalf of the county government on the county's policies and procedures on workplace harassment. We have an active employee population of approximately 10,000 who serve the residents of the county, and we strive to be an organization free of harassment of any kind. Currently, it is the policy of Montgomery County government that all employees, contractors, volunteers, and interns complete the prevention of workplace harassment training within 30 days of employment and repeat the training every 3 years. The purpose of the training is to communicate the county's policy on harassment and discrimination. The training defines workplace harassment and provides guidelines and procedures for reporting, processing, and investigating complaints. The county executive has requested the Montgomery County government employees participate in special training that expands our current workplace harassment training to include sexual harassment, sexual assault, domestic violence, and bullying. The Office of Human Resources is currently developing this training to provide the workforce with information and guidance on how to act or react to certain situations. We want all employees to feel safe and know that harassment of any kind has no place in any workplace. To reinforce a harassment-free environment, county managers and supervisors are required to complete the EEO and diversity management training every 3 years, and workplace violence training within their first year as manager or supervisor. The EEO and diversity management training is a workshop where managers become familiar with management's role in maintaining a harassment-free workplace and the EEO policy and complaint process. In addition, managers and supervisors receive an overview of the laws, including EEO and the Americans with Disabilities Act, and various case studies to help them apply this information. In the required workplace violence training, managers and supervisors learn the county's policy and reporting process, how to organize and, recognize the warning signs and stages of workplace violence, and how to maintain a safe work environment. In the event of harassment complaints, the trainings for employees and managers outline the steps to promptly report the complaint to OHR's EEO and Diversity Division or another point of contact, such as a supervisor or any other management personnel, including the department director. Depending on the complaint, an investigation may be conducted by an EEO investigator or another authority such as the police department. The county responds to all harassment complaints in a timely and serious manner. Our goal is to identify the inappropriate behavior, if it exists, appropriately address it, and maintain a harassment-free work environment for all of our employees and customers. Thank you again for the opportunity to present today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have at the end of the panel. So. And by the way, I'm joined by Angela Washington, also, who's the EEO and Diversity Manager for the county.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Washington, a familiar face, having participated in your training.
Good morning.
Mr. Miller, I think we're having one, did you have a prepared presentation, Ms. Washington? I think we're just having one representative from the county government. Thank you, very good. Mr. Miller.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Council President, members of the council. I'm Keith Miller from the Montgomery County Revenue Authority. I appreciate your time this morning and the opportunity to be here and meet with you all. The Revenue Authority, as we look at this, the Revenue Authority, I think, is a little unique in that we're really kind of a small agency. We have approximately about 70 employees year-round, and we're very seasonal. So we go up to about 400 employees in season. So our policies are in place. All of our staff is trained upon hire. They are affiliated and presented with our policies that are in place. And so we do a mandatory training generally within 30 days of their hire each year. And then we also do a rehire, since they are seasonal, and most of our employees do return on a seasonal basis. We do a rehire where all of our policies are again reinforced and retaught to them. We personally, and again in the unique situation that we're in, I personally try and attend about 90% of those, both hire and rehire training policies. It's important to us because, as you know, in managing golf courses, customer service is the key of what we do. So we take a lot of time to talk to our staff about harassment, not only from the kinds of harassment that can happen from employee to employee and in situations with management, and what to do in those situations and how they're to be reported. That's all in our policies and outlines. But we also spend the time to talk about service to our customers and the residents of the county, as well as situations where what we find a lot is that a harassment can happen from the employee, from the customer to the employee, and how to deal with those situations. Because we're emphasizing good customer service and great customer service, it doesn't mean that a person should be subjected, an employee should be subjected to harassment from the other way. So that's an important part of what we emphasize and discuss, and how to handle those situations when they do arise, because we have to make sure that the employee can perform at their highest level, but we also have to make sure that employee feels comfortable and safe, and they understand the difference between delivering good customer service and also crossing that barrier. So we spend a lot of time and emphasis on that. So between the new orientation, employee orientations, the rehire orientations, we're working with our staffs, as I said, on an annual basis, and understanding what our customer looks like, the diversity of our customer, and how those interactions should all be handled. In addition to that, our management staff, because again, we are on a seasonal basis, our management staff goes through extensive training each winter in how to handle employee situations, how to handle customer situations, and how to better prepare ourselves for the upcoming season. I will just leave it there. As far as, again, with us being kind of unique in a seasonal basis and a small, it's very hands-on approach. We have a written policy, and everybody is brought up to date on what that is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I'm not sure who from HOC will take the lead, but it's your turn, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you. The Housing Opportunities Commission is pleased to participate in this council briefing on workplace harassment policies. Like the county, HOC too is committed to creating and maintaining harassment-free workplaces for all our employees and residents. For the record, my name is Patrick Mattingly. I'm the Director of Human Resources. With me here today are Louis Cheney, the agency's Labor Relations Manager, and was the point person to gather information provided in HOC's packet submission for today. In addition, we have Huota Johannes somewhere, back there in the pink. She's HOC's trainer, and she's the one that helps bring this to life for our employees. Included in your packet are HOC personnel and collective bargaining agreement policies for maintaining a harassment-free workplace. As you are all aware, having laws and policies does not always get the job done unless they can be brought to life through training and communication and enforcement. HOC requires all new employees to attend a first day orientation. In that orientation, employees are issued policies, including HOC's policy on harassment. During orientation, employees are required to acknowledge receipt of the policies. In addition, HOC dedicates about an hour of this orientation day to the topic of preventing workplace harassment. Under HOC's in-service training program, all employees are required to attend a mandatory preventing workplace harassment training every 3 years, much like the counties. This is a two-hour training which touches on scenarios and allows the opportunities for employees to ask questions, seek clarification, or present what-if hypotheses of their own. In addition, HOC's in-service training program also has a mandatory full-day training for new supervisors. This training is dedicated as an orientation for new supervisors and covers the agency's CBA with McGeo and personnel policies, which includes HOC's policies on harassment. You asked many things in your request for information. With respect to an enforcement policy for participation in workforce harassment training compliance, other than notification to employee and supervisor and understanding throughout the agency that this is a mandatory training, I can tell you we do not actually have an enforcement policy. So we took a nosedive into the data to see what we could discover based on our current active employees and what our history and attendance was. Of our 333 current employees, and with the help of AWOTE, we were able to confirm 90% of our staff had been to harassment training within the last 30 months. About 25 employees we could not actually confirm. That does not necessarily mean they didn't go. It does mean we couldn't confirm it. This was brought to life through your request, so I appreciate that. And there is more that we need to do in this area to be sure, because as I stated earlier, it's not only training, it's to be sure that you're communicating this throughout everything, through general staff meetings, through executive directors meetings, through et cetera, et cetera. So it is a constant piece of communication that comes out from HOC. Included in your packet as well is a communication that we send out to notify people about just their correspondence and email and how you speak to people and what you say. You need to be careful. So we constantly send this information out, and it's not unlike other things. Some of these items, such as secondary employment requirements, such as ethics, such as others, you've got to keep out there. You got to figure out a way to communicate that to your staff. And so we've come up with this system where we send out these communiques quarterly on different topics throughout the year. Finally, with respect to the demographics, HOC has a pretty diverse workforce. About 2/3 of the workforce is female. 60% is African American, approximately 15% is Hispanic, 10% Asian. The one place that we've had difficulty in becoming a diverse workforce is with our trades. It is virtually all male. I've been at HOC for 20 years and we've only had one female, so that is an area that we probably need to work harder. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Mattingly. And now, WSSC.
Good morning.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, I'm Monica Johnson. I'm the Deputy General Manager for Strategic Partnerships at WSSC, and with me at the table is Donald King, the Commission's Equal Employment Opportunity Officer. So first of all, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk to you about our harassment policies. The Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission is committed to a workplace environment that is free from harassment. And in that regard, WSSC has instituted a series of comprehensive policies and procedures to ensure that harassment is unequivocally prohibited. In the event that any type of harassment does occur, we have instituted effective responses to quickly deal with the issue. The packet we submitted provides insight into WSSC's anti-harassment efforts over the past 2 fiscal years, and I will now summarize our submittal. With respect to the content and frequency of our workplace harassment training, I offer the following. WSSC provides EEO and anti-harassment training to all new employees in its mandatory new employee orientation. This is scheduled every month and is conducted by the EEO officer. You'll see slides from our new employee orientation anti-harassment training at attachment number 2. In addition, WSSC provides mandatory EEO and anti-harassment training that alternates each year between managers and employees. The most recent training was conducted for managers and was completed in FY 2017. The slides from that training are in your packet at attachment number 3. In addition to those trainings, this year WSSC has embarked on new workplace harassment training. We anticipate that the training will be complete by the end of fiscal year 18, and it will be executed in 2 stages. The first stage is a required online program that will both train managers and supervisors on harassment and then test their competencies in various dimensions of harassment. Once that's complete, and the slides for that are at attachment number 4. Once that's complete, the WSSC Human Resources Director and the EEO officer will provide joint training that will be specifically configured to address any competency issues that were identified in the online training. Again, that's all at attachment 6. That same process will be used for employees, so that there's a manager's module and an employee's module. With respect to enforcement policies for workforce harassment training, as a matter of practice, all non-compliant employees are reported to the directors of the agency, and the directors then follow up through the chain of command to make sure that the employees take the training. For the training that was conducted for managers in FY17, all of the managers complied. In terms of our policies and procedures for reporting and investigating workplace harassment complaints, currently, WSSC processes its workplace harassment complaints pursuant to our EEO harassment policy, which is in your packet at attachment number 7. It includes harassment, employee discrimination, and retaliation. Our procedures for disciplinary action taken when harassment is found to have been occurred constitute the following. The EEO harassment policy clearly states that, and I'll quote, WSSC shall consider harassment, discrimination, and retaliation a serious act of misconduct and grounds for disciplinary action. In addition, we have a disciplinary policy that states that violations of the Commission's policies against harassment and discrimination are among the areas of conduct that would be justified by suspension or release. That's in your packet at attachment number 8. The specific language can be found in paragraph 4D1 on page 6. It's a thick policy, so that's what I'm directing where to go. You asked about our ongoing efforts to review our enhancement policies and what we're currently doing. I do want to note that in your packet at attachment number 1 is a message, a correspondence that went out from our general manager on November 29th, 2017, to all Commission employees that made it clear that WSSC has zero tolerance for any types of inappropriate behavior, that the Commission is committed to a workplace environment where sexual harassment is prohibited. It encouraged witnesses to come forward without any fear of retaliation. It also provided links to additional information, the contact information to our EEO officer. In terms of our workforce demographics, approximately 40% of our workforce is white, 49% is African American, 5% is Hispanic, 5% is Asian, and about 1%, less than 1%, is either of mixed race or Native American. We have about 70% of our workforce is male and about 30% is female. In terms of outreach to continue to diversify the workforce, we work through our talent pipeline. We partner with schools to encourage individuals from all backgrounds to pursue careers in STEM. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any additional questions that you have about our policies or our practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Good. All right. Well, I will ask a question or two and turn it to my colleagues to do the same. We've got some lights. So I wanted to begin with the county, and certainly if any of the other agencies want to share best practices or, insights, that's quite welcome. my first question for Ms. Stokes, and obviously Ms. Washington anytime. It's a general question, but how do you identify and understand when there's a culture issue at a department and take action to change that culture? There have been incidents at particular departments over the years, and there are concerns that, as a whole, the department is not keeping up. So without naming any particular department, I'd like to know in general, how do you understand that issue? How do you evaluate that issue? Because it's a subtle description, or there's some subtlety to the concept, but of course there's reality to it. So could you speak to that general question, please?
So I can speak to it generally. Culture it's big, right?
Can you
So
please get a little closer to the mic?
okay, sorry. So culture is big. So we're talking about, I guess, workplace violence and harassment, but culture to me could be just, the behaviors of the particular department, the behaviors of the county. When situations have occurred, whether they are in the harassment space, and Ms. Washington can speak to that more specifically because she's on site when those issues arise, but I deal a lot with a number of different departments just around culture between, manager and employees, or employees to employees, union versus non-union. And the way that I've addressed it since I've been here, and I think we've done some really good work around this even before I joined the county, is by going in and doing what I would call a climate assessment or a climate survey, which, entails a number of different processes where we would, go in and do maybe interviews, small group, one-on-one, email, set up an anonymous email box for people to actually send information in, so that they can feel comfortable
Yeah.
and free in reporting whatever's necessary. Now, the way that it's been handled is that we need a neutral. So we normally, we have a number of consultants that we work with. A number of them actually, in working with the college, will come in and consult with the department. They will interview the department director, they will interview the union staff, leadership staff, and then we come together to really create a strategy on how we want to go in and evaluate the culture, the climate of the organization. And usually what happens is the consultant will come back with a number of recommendations, and we will work to implement those changes. And depending on, the condition of the culture, sometimes there's just quick fixes that we can do, but I will say in most instances, this is a process that probably needs to happen over 12 to 18 months, not even longer.
Sure.
Because cultures are very thick. Cultures are kind of, again, they've been living and breathing in it, and if there's a need to change it, it's not going to happen overnight. So that generally, that is how we've gone in from an OHR perspective to assist departments. Now, Ms. Washington may be able to speak more from a harassment perspective when we know that there is an issue or known issue in a department, and what she does from an investigatory process.
Good morning, Angela Washington. Where complaints come to us, that's oftentimes a sort of a red flag within departments. It may materialize in performance issues, employee morale issues, and how we often receive it are formal complaints. When we go and interview employees that are complaining, where we oftentimes see a culture issue is sort of a Me Too type of syndrome, where an employee will say, this occurred to me and it also occurred to my coworkers. We then interview those coworkers, and those coworkers could also be complainants in a EEO discrimination complaint. So we take large measures, not only to interview the complainant and witnesses, but additional individuals within the department if we notice that there's a culture. Also, if there's an increase of complaints, that raises a red flag for us. If there is all of a sudden increase of, let's say, sexual harassment complaints, where an individual or supervisor or manager or employee is repeatedly named in EEO complaints, even though where there's no probable cause, sort of when there's smoke, there's fire. And so if John Smith incident is repeatedly named a sexual harassment complaint, that gives rise to us to look deeper, because it could be that employees are afraid to report, they're afraid to come forward, and so that requires to take different measures to investigate a complaint. We've met employees at 6 o'clock in the morning and talked to them at 9 o'clock at night. We've gone to the workplaces, we've met off-site because they don't want to be seen. Whatever it takes, we want to be sure the employees are comfortable in reporting complaints.
And I'll just add that sometimes it does make it, I'm not going to say, it's challenging to get to the final answer or report, because I find that when you pull one thread, you start pulling another, and something that we thought may take a week to investigate now takes 30 days, because we thought initially maybe the problem was this big, but as we get in, it's a lot larger. So, I know that there have been some issues with, why does it take so long? Well, it takes so long because we aim to be very thorough in the investigation and in the review, and we want to make sure that everyone is heard. If there's an issue or someone is named, we want to pick at it. We want to make sure that we hear the complaint completely, so whatever the issue is.
Okay. My second question is getting into tricky territory here. I just want to openly acknowledge that. But some time ago, there was an incident where a county employee, there was a dispute among county employees around an employee's having a Confederate flag visible on a vehicle. And I know that case is not something you can comment on, but I want to ask you, how do you consider that issue? That has become that issue of the Confederate flag and what it means has risen to the top of discussion in this country. And it is something that the meaning of that, I think, has changed over time, at least for some people. What policies or procedures do we have that contemplate that? And if none, what do we need to do in order to contemplate that issue through policies and procedures? Ms. Stokes.
So I'm going to point to actually something that's in your packet under the EEO, Section 5, and one of the definitions is under harassment. And just to kind of entertain me for a second, it basically says inappropriate written, verbal, or physical conduct, including the dissemination or display of written or graphic material based on one's race, color, religion, national origin, ancestry, sex, sexual orientation, marital status, age, disability, or genetic status. So, and it goes on a little bit. So it's clear in my mind that if something is reported, and let's just use the Confederate flag in this situation, and it's reported as a complaint of harassment because we don't really know how it was being used, then we have to investigate that. We need to go in and look, well, how was it being used? Was it just a display, or was it being used to intimidate, threaten, harass an employee? So for me, that particular incident would fall under the definition of harassment, just because it is a display that offended or harassed an employee.
Certainly would make for an inhospitable workplace, in my opinion.
Correct.
To have to see that around you in the workplace would be deeply offensive.
And I will tell you, in that particular situation, it was looked at from the department level, and it was also looked at from OHR's perspective as well. And again, I want to emphasize that we take these situations very seriously, so seriously that I know that we are actually going to be reviewing the county regulations, and Section 5 is one of the ones that we are looking to rewrite, and in any way that we can make it more specific, of course, we will do that.
Okay, thank you. So you are looking to rewrite Section 5.
Correct, and a number of other sections
And a
of the
number of other
regulations.
sections.
Yeah.
That's important then.
Yeah. They haven't been looked at in about 4 years, and
40 years?
4
4 years, okay.
Not
Times have
40.
changed a lot in 40 years. They've even changed in 4 years.
Yeah, even 4 years, and
Yeah.
my point
Oh,
exactly.
absolutely.
So I think, kind of given the climate of, the nation and what's going on right now, I do think we need to take a closer look and not put procedures in place, but if there's any way to tighten up on the policy, to ensure that our employees and our customers and volunteers and interns are safe when they're here, and if they feel as though they're being harassed, that we have policy in place to protect them as well as the county.
I'm pleased to hear that that is ongoing or forthcoming, and we'll look forward
It
to
is forthcoming,
participating in that. Ms. Navarro, Council Vice President.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to come and answer the questions and present to us. So, Ms. Stokes, a couple of things jumped out at me. One was your answer to the question of culture. And you said the culture is big, and I would agree with that. And then you just talked about the climate in the nation. And so, for me, that's why this has been a very important topic, because obviously it's no secret that Montgomery County continues to, grow in its population and also in its diversity. And therefore, I think the culture within our departments is key. And we'll not get into a lot of specifics, because I understand there's some litigation going on, but, specifically when it comes to very crucial services that our residents depend on, right? So a lot of the presentation I heard was about workplace harassment, which is very important. But then, of course, I'm trying to understand what are the procedures when there are particular departments that our residents depend on very heavily, which are life or death situations. And perhaps there have been, reports that are under investigation where there have been alleged comments that are derogatory to a large number of our residents. So then for me, the concern is, okay, so if you follow the bouncing ball, how do we ensure that our residents have the confidence that our county government services are going to be deployed in such a way that it's culturally proficient and appropriate and does what they need to do, which it's a little bit outside of the workplace piece, right? So I'm taking it out to our residents and what our taxpayers expect in terms of our services and the absolute respect that is demanded whenever you encounter any county employee to deliver a service to you. So in that respect, I'm trying to figure out, okay, so how are we going to deal with this? Particularly if we have contractors that have a large pool of employees that might be of color or maybe immigrants. So number one, what is their recourse? Because they may not feel like maybe they have the same protections as somebody else in terms of reporting. That's one. But then, do we have in place any kind of process so that we can ensure that our residents feel confident and secure when they're calling for a particular service from the county, that whoever's going to present themselves to help is not someone that perhaps has had these beliefs, that has expressed these beliefs, okay? And this is big for us in this county. We just had this conversation about the census and the resolution that we adopted. We talk all day long about how diverse we are and how incredibly wonderful in our values. But we gotta examine ourselves very deeply in terms of what that means with regards to our employees going out there and understanding what we expect. And so this, this is a big deal, and it's a big deal, especially in, like I said, communities of color and immigrant communities. So what are we doing with that? This whole issue of culture, and how do we change that? How do we ensure that people understand what is expected here in Montgomery County, what our taxpayers expect? All of that, I think, is really important. And again, I think it goes a little bit beyond some of the training. I know I participated as well, but this is more systemic. So how do we then address that?
Okay. If I may address that, from the perspective of our division, we handle cases not only of employees filing complaints against each other, but the public filing complaints against employees as it relates to delivering goods and services. The public has to come to us for goods and services. So they can't be met with a police officer or a firefighter or someone that's an HHS that's discriminating against them. And so contractors and the public can file complaints directly with my office, and we investigate those complaints. We've also had instances where contractors were involved in discriminatory behavior against our employees employees or against other contractors, and we will do the investigation, or we force the contractors to do the investigation and take action. If they don't, we'll force them to remove that individual from any county property or threaten to sever the contract. We take them very seriously. Just because it's someone from the public or it's a contractor, we don't force them to go to an outside FIPA agency such as EEOC or Maryland Commission on Human Rights. So we take them just as seriously, and we take just as severe action. When we get complaints as it relates to the public, and I don't want to get into specifics, I know sort of we're dancing around it, but it's not merely the protection of employees, but we have things that are offensive and the public can see it, it could affect the delivery of services. So if I am someone from the public and someone has an offensive noose or swastika or Confederate flag on there, I may not go to that police station. I may not go to that fire station. And we have to be clear that the message is clear, that we're open for business for everybody and that we're not discriminating. So when it comes to issues such as that, particularly from my perspective of that office, it is unacceptable in the workplace, and it's unacceptable to expose the public to that without any question.
Thank
And
you.
not that I am I know all that there needs to be known about the code of conduct, but it is also my understanding that specifically in the public safety clusters, like the police and fire department, there is a certain code of conduct that they have to operate by. And I think that it's important that, again, as we think about this from a regulatory perspective, also with the policies and procedures at the department level, that whatever that code of conduct is that we, hold them accountable to executing the goods and services according to that code. And be clear about what the consequences are when they're not. And I think we have to be courageous about that, again, given the specific climate. The other thing that I will mention, and I kind of learned this just through meeting with you and just really reviewing our workplace harassment policies, and just as we kind of touch on sexual harassment, sexual assault, and domestic violence, what you find is that people are also very scared. They're embarrassed, they don't want to talk about this, and how do we, again, create a culture, how do we create an environment where people feel comfortable and feel safe to be able to report it? I don't know all the answers to that, but I know that it's a known fact, and I know that it's something that we do need to think about and we do need to address, and the only way that you build it is really over time, and being able to have some independency in where people can go to complain and then know that something is going to be done about it. So I
Well,
felt
that
it
was going to be my
important.
follow-up question, because as chair of GO, obviously, always interested in seeing how we can structurally change something. So whenever, for example, there's an RFP that goes out and there is a contract that is executed, do we have any particular way of ensuring that those employees of these contractors know what are your rights and responsibilities, or what, how can you make a complaint, the fact that you will be protected so that you don't feel intimidated, and that it's not about being courageous, but it's about really doing the right thing. Because again, I always extrapolate to what will happen to the community, right? If it's happening to an employee of a contractor, then how does this translate in the service to the community? So I want to make sure that folks feel empowered to say, hey, this is not right, and it's not right because obviously we need to hold ourselves to the highest standards. So do we have particular requirements and contracts that, so that these contractors understand there is a process and they need to share this with their employees, and they know exactly how to follow whatever it is they need to follow if there is a need for a complaint, without feeling, well, maybe I'll lose the contract if I complain too much or something like that.
Yeah. And David Dice would be the appropriate person to talk about procurement requirements. But I have to tell you, from the EO perspective, we perceive those contractors the same way that we would perceive employees, that they can come to us and we have a real understanding that there's a fear that if I complain, I won't have any work left.
Right.
And so it's not merely taking the complaint, but following through afterwards and see what happened to her or him after
Right.
they filed the complaint. Did you sever their contract? Did you cut back their hours? Did you put them at a remote location that makes it hard for them to come to work because they're using transportation? And we have those conversations with those individuals and say, what's happened? Have they stopped speaking to you? Are you now doing grunt work that you weren't doing before? I think that's part of it, and we have to be more creative, and I think we are, in terms of really getting inside and not looking at the complaint on a surface level, but really figuring out, why didn't you come forward, and what are they really doing to you, and why have you been eating outside, or why have your hours gone from 20 to 2 hours a week?
Right.
I think those are important.
Okay, I'll follow up with David Dice.
I also want to just kind of make note that David Dice would be the person for the specific
Yeah.
incident that we're referring to.
Oh.
But I really
Well, I just
would
want to
wanna-
know in general.
Yeah,
so
it
we'll
would be
address
Cherie,
that.
and I will actually, I think it is, but I don't want to put that on the record, so I'd like to circle back to her and make sure that for all contracts where they are delivering services, goods, whatever it is, that we do have some type of a clause in there. Sometimes things get kind of mixed up because I know that we have certain things in the contracts that align with our policies and procedures, but I'm not sure on this one, so I'll have to ask her and I'll circle
Well,
back.
I just want to know generally. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that we should
Yeah.
have something that's standard
I'm pretty sure.
throughout so that anybody understands
Understands.
what are your
Yeah.
rights and responsibilities of what, you can expect, and that it's communicated to the employees of the
Employees, that's right,
contractors,
yeah.
which is, really what we want to get to. Thank you.
Mr. Rice?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And thank you very much to all of you for certainly highlighting for us the types of training that you go through. And those things are important. But I also want to make sure that folks understand that they are not at all the solution. A person can sit through a training and still believe what they believe, do what they do regardless of what we train them to do. And so I want our public to also understand that while we're taking the appropriate steps, as we should as individual entities, and sometimes that might help to inform some who aren't sure. There are some who have convinced themselves that there are certain situations that they believe, and that's how they then act and end up treating our constituency. And so I want to follow on what Councilmember Navarro was talking about, because I think it's incredibly important for us to really shine a light on some of the challenges that we face in terms of what limited we can truly do for some of these kinds of things. And I'm going to provide you guys an example without naming names. We had an issue to where we had a development that was coming into Damascus. And this development was going to be treating people who were recovering substance abuse users. And we actually had an officer, a sworn officer in Montgomery County Police Department, who took it upon himself to then go and testify in front of the planning board. And one of his comments was about the propensity of people like this and people of lower socioeconomic status to commit crimes. And he based it on his experience. Now, again, he wasn't speaking as a sworn officer, he was speaking as an individual. But that person is still a sworn officer within Montgomery County Police Department. And that concerns me. He didn't violate any laws. He didn't violate a policy. He was speaking as an individual. My concern is what was at his heart, and then how that then affects his interaction with our constituency as a whole. And so while we have these protected classes, and I'm actually happy to hear that we're looking at a Section 5 rewrite, because I actually took the time to pull up a little piece of legislation that I had done back when I was serving in Annapolis with Councilmember Hucker, then Delegate Hucker, which was our bullying bill, and we'll get to Montgomery County Public Schools in a little bit, that talks specifically about some of the protected classes. I noticed that they're a little bit different in terms of what and some of them say, and others to be determined or whatever follows within law, but some of them actually have things like socioeconomic status in them, some don't. And so from that perspective, having a very clean, where everything is together and there, so that we can ensure that all of those things are free from discrimination and harassment, I think would be important. But I want to bring it back because those are the challenges that we face, not just with their interaction with their fellow, with their constituents and the people that they're supposed to serve, but also with their fellow employees. Because if they believe that about someone else in the community, they're also going to believe that about somebody else who's working alongside them as well. And then how that interaction and relationship works, and then the tension that's there, and so it's concerning. And so I'm curious as to, how we go about getting beyond the seminar, and truly getting to some sort of training that actually gets at the root of what some of these assumptions, misconceptions may be. And so I'll leave it there. I have another question as well, but I want to start with that because I think that that's an incredibly important starting point for us, if anybody wants to comment.
Particularly relates to that type of conduct that we see outside. I think part of our message to department directors and departments is that we have an obligation to be sure that the behavior that we exhibit on the outside is reflective of the type of service that we're going to give on the inside. So there's been some instances where we had employees that engage in offensive behavior in the workplace by use of social media. They would say inappropriate racial things, sexual things, and where we could tie that to their county employee, we've taken action, adverse employment action against those individuals, particularly when it comes to public safety agencies. And you have a Facebook page, and let's say if you keep scrolling down, someone has a cruiser or a fire engine or a county uniform because they work for DOT. If we can, and we do, we'll go through their Facebook. If we can tie it to county employment, we will take appropriate action against that employee because we want to send the message that it's not just us, the public sees that. And the feedback we get is that you have public employees that don't believe in serving people with disabilities, that are racist, that are engaged in sexual harassment, providing service to us, the taxpayers. And so when we get those types of things, particularly with use of social media, we do take action, as you know, I think that's what you're sort of alluding to. The other thing does require that we spend much more resources in terms of training our employees and our supervisors and managers. I will speak not only when we talk about EO training, but in particular other types of diversity training. You talked about the police department, and I do a lot of training there, but they also employ not only outside contractors, but their own officers and their executives to deliver the message about appropriate behavior and cultural competency. In particular, Commander Marcus Jones does a separate track on diversity, and it's real live what the officers see. So it's very specific to the industry. He sits in a chair and he pretends like he's a motorist, and then he makes racial remarks to see if he can get the officers to react to it. That's what it's like to be out in the field, to be in a patrol car. And so we want to have the senior management, their executives delivering the message as well, because I think it sends a different message if it's top down. And I think we need more of that throughout the county.
Yeah, and you actually dovetailed right into the second part, which is the true cultural competency piece of this that goes beyond the harassment training and discrimination training, and really is a more in-depth kind of, and I know that when again, going back to my Annapolis days, I talked about this with our school resource officers. We wanted to make sure that especially for them, because they deal with our kids, that we couldn't have someone who was then imparting that kind of bias with our children, right? And so we wanted to make sure that that was a part of what we did with our school resource officers. But I don't know if it goes beyond that in terms of what it is that we require, if there's a requirement. I mean, I would just say for our ride-on bus operators, to have cultural competency as a requirement would make a lot of sense because they deal with a very diverse population. As I ride the ride-on from time to time just to see what's going on in my community. So along those lines, has there been any conversation about those kinds of things as a part of this? And again, I'm not talking about, it's two different things. We all get the email link for a training and a webinar, right? And you breeze through that as you're watching TV, as you're helping your children with homework, and you click on the next slide and you look at it and you click on the next slide. That's not going to give you a change in an implicit bias that you have for a particular class. That's not going to change that. And so, but going through a cultural competency seminar where you have an instructor that's before you and walking through, much like what you said with Commander Jones, and going through some types of scenarios will help. Again, there's never going to be a panacea for, and I get that, if a person's deeply rooted and that's what they believe, and you can't change some of that. But you can educate some folks. And so from that perspective, has there been conversations about taking it a step further?
I think that's part of the conversation in terms of what we're looking at now from a training, again, from a training perspective. You know, I don't, you know, we sent you PowerPoints of like kind of the chalk and talk of what the training is, but I think it is a continued dialogue. I think it is, you know, using a case study methodology. I think it is scenario based. I think it is what Ms. Washington just talked about. But I think it's a bigger question. I think the question is, you know, core competency, what does that mean for Montgomery County? You know, and how do we drive it from the top down? I can go and touch on it over here in DOT, and then I can go over here and touch on it at the fire department, and then I can go over here and touch on it at HHS. But my question is bigger, like what is the core competency from a government perspective so that it is being driven down and also being pushed back up? And it's just a bigger question for me, so I can anecdotally go in and say, this is what we're gonna do over here. But I am interested in the bigger platform here.
Yeah.
And I can talk about it incrementally, and we can go in and, you know, do a climate survey, but I really do think overall it's just a bigger question. And I don't want to go in and just answer the one question,
No,
because to me it's just bigger.
You've actually hit right on it, and I heard Councilmember Navarro and Council Vice President Navarro echoing yes, because that's something that she and I have had a conversation about in terms of a new lens that we look at for this county. Let me just say that
and this unconscious bias.
Yes.
You know, I don't know that people really understand what that means, and I don't even know that people understand that they may have it.
That's right.
That they're doing
That's right.
it. And to me, that's the conversation.
Right, and that's what needs to happen, because I'm born and raised in this county. I remember a time in which, and it still is fresh in my mind, I was driving home from Herman Sporting Goods and got pulled over by an officer as I was coming home from work. And the officer immediately started going into me about why I had a pager. Now, again, I'm an only child. My parents decided to spoil me with all kinds of things. And so that was one of the things that I was just fortunate enough. I wanted it. My parents got it for me. But, you know, we actually ended up filing a complaint. And that was a time that was very different from what it is now in terms of my interactions with my Montgomery County police officers. I have been one of those where we've seen across the nation concerns about police departments and their interaction with our communities of color. And I've been incredibly defensive of my police department, who is, I think, come light years in terms of where we are and where we need to be when it comes to our interactions with our constituents. However, there are a few people who were still there when I was growing up, when I got pulled over in Herman Sporting Goods, that are still on the force. Their views haven't changed. And so from that perspective, while some have, some haven't, and what we need to do is figure out ways in which we can continue to reach out to them. And I'm not just picking on the police, that's just been my interaction. And make sure that we have, you know, a clear policy that really reinforces that type of training that ensures that those folks who are still holding on to those very antiquated views of what our community should look like versus what it does look like and how far we've come needs to be the law of the land. And, you know, it's one of those where I hear from my constituents. I know that others who represent some of our areas hear from our constituents as well, that continue to allege that there are incidents, and I don't question that they are from time to time incidents that happen. What we need to do is, just like Dr. Smith says, you don't have to be sick to get better. We can continue to strive, even though we've gotten light years better than we used to be, to continue to push to that next level in terms of providing that top-notch service that folks expect here in Montgomery County. And so from that perspective, it goes beyond just our constituency, but to also our other employees who have to also deal with those folks who espouse those same kind of views to them. I've heard it from other departments, from managers and leaders in other departments who have come to me and said, look, there's a lot of stuff that's going on that you don't hear about. And so from that perspective, I think that we can take this to the next level. So while, again, we're good, I think that we still have a lot of work to do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mr. Berliner.
Ms. Stokes, I don't often have a lot of interaction with you, but whenever I do hear you, I'm just so impressed by the quality of your leadership and just your persona. But I have a fundamental question. I don't have context. So advise us, if you will, whether or not we are seeing an increase in harassment complaints, what it has been over, if you will, the last 5 years. Are we seeing more recently? Yeah. How big an issue, we know how important the issue is. I don't know how big it is in terms of its day-to-day impact.
So we did provide a chart over the past 3 years in terms of what the activity has been, and we have not at this point seen an uptick at this point. So I don't know, Angela, you've been doing it a lot longer here in the county, but that was one of the pieces of information that generally I wanted to know and look at. So we have not at this point, but that, could change. So.
The data that's provided to council was regarding sexual harassment complaints, and particularly in light of the hashtag #MeToo, the county has not experienced a significant increase in that particular type of complaint. That being said, we have seen an increase of intake through my division of employees complaining more generally and more complaints of EO-related issues. Some of it relates to the fiscal state of the county, the nation. When people are losing jobs, they're going to file a complaint. They're going to file a discrimination complaint. When you hear about police shootings, and we saw this in Baltimore, we saw this across almost every major country in the nation, it's going to come here as well. We had a little bit of a break, and we said we didn't have a police shooting this month, and now we're back on the uptake again. When that happens, my division expects to get an increase of race discrimination complaints and an increase of complaints along every protected category, because people are heightened, they're more sensitive. With the hashtag of #MeToo, that has, people say, well, what's that about? It's empowering people to file complaints. Now, whether there's merit to the complaint or not, they feel like they have some place to go. And so we have to be responsive to what's going out in the real world. And so, again, have we seen an increase of people coming through my division? Absolutely. I mean, they're complaining about the workforce more generally. They're complaining that the supervisor's being mean to me, that forget the EO issue, that relationships amongst coworkers and supervisors and managers are strained because people are overworked, they're overwhelmed, they see what's going on with, Me Too and sex discrimination, race discrimination on a national level, and of course it's going to impact our employees. We can't sanitize the real world from what's going on within Montgomery County. And our responsibility, not only from my division, but from supervisors and managers and directors, how do we deal with the impact of that on our employees in the workplace, and how does that impact the delivery of services? Because it is. And I tell you, there are some weeks that we have 10 new intakes. Now, some of them may not be EEO, but they want to have some place to go because of everything that's going on. When there's a police shooting, we had a complaint, 2 complaints before I came here today, and that's what we expect.
And how do we compare to other jurisdictions of similar size?
In terms of complaints, I really can't tell you because a lot of jurisdictions don't release that. And I will tell you that Montgomery County will appear to have more complaints, more EEO-related complaints, because we process every incident, every verbal and every written complaint of discrimination or harassment. So although the legal threshold is severe and pervasive, we will take action if it's just one isolated comment that's offensive or in violation of our policy, which is, it's not inconsistent with the law, but our threshold as it relates to have you violate the policy is much lower. So we're processing a larger number of complaints because we have a zero tolerance policy within the county.
Thank you for those answers.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Ms. Navarro.
I just wanted to sort of close the loop and say that, we will definitely, the GO committee will have a follow-up on this issue, and if my colleagues have questions. I do think that it's important to be able to communicate both with our employees as well as the public, what are the threshold questions? When I heard this notion about, I remember seeing a Facebook post of a police officer of ours with a profile picture and in uniform on a motorcycle making some extraordinarily inflammatory remarks. I think it was about Montgomery Village. And I asked about that, and I was told, no, this is his personal Facebook page, is fine. And so I think that we need to, because our employees also should know that, hey, maybe I can't do this, perhaps this will have a consequence. But if there is sort of this discrepancy where some of the advice I got was, no, this is a personal page, you can do whatever you want, but then it turns out that perhaps not really, we do need to be on the same page in that respect. And so I would love to have a follow-up GO, session to just kind of understand all of this and figure out how we can re-educate everybody,
It's true.
so that folks also know, because it's not fair for an employee if they think, hey, this is, it's my right, it's my personal page, whatever, I can do whatever, I'm protected, but maybe you're not, type of
It's
thing, so.
interesting. Again, we've been really looking at this, and
Yeah.
this is before all of this happened. We were actually looking at the workplace violence and harassment policy, and there is going to be a whole new section on cyber security, cyber, what do you call it, social media,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
email, and all of that. And I don't know that it's really been touched that way
Right.
in our current policy. So we
Right.
will be going more in depth into that.
Great.
While we've got the content together, I feel like it's really important to have an interactive experience in this training. So I don't want it to be a PowerPoint, we're going to do the talk and chalk. Like, let's get people up, let's look at some videos, let's have some scenarios, let's do some case studies, and let's talk about it. It should be a dialogue.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Elrich.
So right at the end, you were talking about workplace issues and stress-related and workload-related and what people are dealing with. So do we ever examine the workloads we create? And rather than validate or invalidate claims, look at the work situation and say, hey, what we've put people under or the conditions people are working under really aren't ideal, and we actually have a responsibility to address some of this rather than expecting the workforce just to absorb it endlessly?
I will tell you that when we are conducting EO investigations, if we note that there are other labor, employee relations issues, we also cite that on our reports to the managers. So, for example, if the work has been shifted to the one employee and not to others, we cite that. If there are issues with employee relations, employees amongst each other, or there's a supervisor that continuously has issues with employees related to behavioral issues, communication cross cultural lines, we specifically cite those issues. But workload issues would be one of them that we've said this person's disproportionate, even if it's a non-probable cause. We don't find discrimination. What we find is that the distribution of work is not consistent across all county, all the employees in that division.
And we have.
They're two different things. Is somebody being treated unfairly, but there's a broader issue about whether the load, and I won't name some of the places that where people have come to me, but talking about staffing levels and who's left and what they're doing and how people feel about their work and what's being pushed on them. Is there at any point when you all go back to supervisors, not say the load's unfair, but you have to do something about staffing levels here because these aren't healthy?
So are you separating that from this conversation, meaning just in general, do we look at
Well, to the
workload?
extent that that triggers
Okay, yeah.
complaints
Then-
or feelings of being pushed on, unfairly pushed or whatever.
Yes, in fact, we more
Yes,
recently
yeah,
had.
absolutely.
We went through a litany of recommendations that were not related to an EO complaint. We found that there was not discrimination in the workplace, but there were other workplace issues regarding workload, communication from the manager to the employees globally. All the employees said, look, she doesn't know how to speak to me. Distribution of workload, the expectation of having to work overtime when that was not communicated. So those are non-EO related issues that my division address, and we do that in partnership with not only the labor team, but with my director more specifically.
Okay. Okay.
So we definitely would have that conversation as it relates to a complaint and it evolves. And Ms. Washington is a part of a report, an investigatory report. She also would write a number of recommendations that then would trigger a conversation, at the director level or management level to look at what is going on in the organization. Aside from that, we are constantly looking at reclassifications, workload, types of positions, people working out of class, and what that needs to look like. And myself as well as my team just coming to the table to strategize, especially around, the budget constraints, how to do this differently. Could we be better at it? Absolutely. But I will tell you, when the conversation comes to us, or if we see something based off of an investigation, we will definitely have that conversation.
Okay, so just to summarize something I heard a moment ago, that employees who post on social media in a way that relates back to their work, but post views that are contrary to policies or values of the county, that's something of concern? Is that what I heard, Ms. Washington?
Absolutely. The challenge is, and both with this and the Confederate flag issue, is the First Amendment issue. And that is what employees and the public will argue, have a First Amendment freedom of speech. And we have to balance that against federal, state, and local discrimination laws. So for me, when it comes to the Confederate flag, it's pretty clear, inappropriate for the workplace and inappropriate with the county facilities. When it comes to issues of posting things when the person's off duty on their own time, not using the county computer, we have to be really clear in forming a nexus between the offensive action or conduct and their workplace. So where an employee says, I have an issue, and I'll give an example that we had a real life issue. It was reported from a resident in West Virginia. She reported to the county executive's office, brought down to our office. An employee looked at a Yahoo article and made inappropriate remarks about individuals with disability and what's the purpose of providing service to them, because they bring no value, essentially. That was a complaint from outside the jurisdiction. We processed it. We discovered that the employee he said he was on lunch break, but he was using a county computer, and it pulled up Montgomery County, right? Social media page, you could arguably say not related because he was on his break, but because it pulled up his Montgomery County address, and we looked at the actual time that he did it, and most people don't take lunch at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, we took action against the employee who was no longer employed with Montgomery County government.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Quick follow-up, and then we'll go to the next panel, which I think will be much briefer, just for all those watching.
Just very quickly, and as you go through that, and I know that the chair of the GO committee, our council vice president, is going to be very in tune to this. If there is state legislation that needs to be put forth as a result to be able to give you the authority or to clearly define some of those things, because I know, again, just going back to what it is that we did with our school system when it came to bullying and harassment and intimidation online via social media and all kinds of things, that is covered in state law. So if a person posts on their personal Facebook page or on their Instagram account something, we can still go in because we have deemed via state law that it creates an environment in the school that then will therefore become a problem. The same thing applies to any of your fellow employees, as well as for your constituency. And so if we can apply it for students that are outside that are doing this, we could certainly do the same thing when it comes to employees. So just please let us know and keep us aware of those kinds of things if that is a necessity.
Okay, thank you very much for your participation on today's panel. Appreciate your presentations and dialogue, and we will look forward to continuing this as we go forward. We're initiating this discussion today, and this is the beginning of an important conversation for us, so thank you so much. Now we will call up this next panel, and I just want to reiterate that we are talking now about interactions between employees and between adults. There is a separate grave concern about incidents of abuse between adults and students in the school system. And we are all alarmed by what we see, and we are working with the school system to ensure we have the most effective response. The committee will be taking that up, in the near future. So today's discussion really does not focus on that particular issue. Really, I say that just so my colleagues understand the premise for the discussion. So we have our second panel, which is MCPS, the college, and park and planning. And we have with us Donna Hollingshead and Mr. Josh Sivan. And then from the college, Ms. Dugan, Mr. Long, Mr. Roop, Ms. Pratt. And from park and planning, Mr. Anderson and Ms. Barney. And is there anyone else from park and planning?
We have a few folks here just for questions, if you have them.
Very good. So why don't we begin with MCPS? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm Josh Sivan. I'm the general counsel. I'm going to make a couple quick points, and then Dr. Hollingshead is going to go into more detail on our training around workplace harassment. And first is we look forward to talking and briefing the committee or the full council on student-to-student harassment and also the intersection between that and child abuse. We're focused here on workplace harassment. Although in the school context, as well as I guess in the college context, we have a number of federal laws that are really important, as well as the state laws that Councilmember Rice mentioned. But Title VI, which deals with race and ethnicity discrimination and harassment, as well as Title IX of the Educational Amendment Acts of 1972 that deals with sexual harassment and discrimination based on sex. And those are important context for our work, and we take very seriously our commitments to live up to those federal mandates. We've done a lot of work recently on policies and regulations around, that touch on workplace harassment. I want to focus on two. First is, and this dovetails with comments from the prior panel, the board recently revised our human relations policy, retitling it Non-Discrimination, Equity, and Cultural Proficiency, seeking to tie together all three of those concepts into one policy. Harassment, workplace harassment is included there. We standardized and made sure our list of protected classes was the same there as in other policies and regulations, and broadened it. Socioeconomic status, as somebody mentioned, is covered, as well as immigration status and a whole host of characteristics. And that sets forth the board's strong commitment to this broad area. The second is that the board put in place, really arising out of our cultural respect compact with our employee associations, the board put in place a workplace bullying policy, which includes harassment based on protected classes like sex harassment or racial harassment, but also more broadly to harassment that doesn't necessarily touch on because of a particular class, but is nonetheless threatening, demeaning, harassing, and that is covered and protected, and we've put in place both training on that front and also a compliance mechanism and a complaint mechanism. The third thing I wanted to mention is our employee code of conduct, which we've put in place in recent years. So the policies are in the policy language, the regulations are in the regulation language, but we really tried to distill that into a short document that we hand out and train on to all of our employees and also make available for the public to really say in plain speak how all of these touch on, and we think that's an important piece. And then we've also put in place social media guidelines that touch on a conversation previously. Finally, quick points before turning it over to Dr. Hollingshead on workplace diversity. A couple years ago, we put forward a broad initiative on workplace diversity, making sure that we have a workplace that is broadly responsive and can engage with all of our students. And those activities have continued and been enhanced under Dr. Smith, and we've provided regular updates to the board, included that work in the board's strategic planning framework going forward. So that was a lot to cover quickly, but I wanted to keep it brief and then turn over to Dr. Hollingshead to continue.
Hello, and thank you for having us here today. I wanted to speak a little bit to the infrastructure and what's different this year and how MCPS has reorganized around this work. And so there are two new areas, a lot of the same people, but really focusing on the work of compliance. So my office I supervise the compliance unit, which is within the Office of School Support and Improvement. And then we also have a Department of Compliance and Investigations that's in our Office of Employee Engagement and Labor Relations. Now, that sounds like a whole lot of names, but the bottom line is that we are committed to having the infrastructure to make sure that we're able to focus on this institutional accountability. And so we want to make sure that all of our staff are aware of what our expectations are for their behaviors, and that they have necessary information in order to act accordingly and create this a lawful and positive, safe, and healthy climate and culture for our workplace, but also for our students, because as our employees thrive, so will our students thrive and succeed. So this year, specifically in the compliance unit, we're responsible for the oversight, monitoring, and coordination of applicable federal, state, and local policy regulations. And to get to that, we developed annual compliance mandatory training for all 23,000 employees. So what that looks like is there are 11 modules. It's a 4-hour training in multiple areas, including today's topic, but specific for the employee conduct portion is our employee code of conduct, equal opportunity in the workplace, workplace bullying, ethics, conflict of interest, and guidance around that. So that's building the positive workplace and addressing the topics specific to today. Within those modules, to address a comment that was made earlier about, it's a link, it's a sit and get, but in these particular modules, we have relevant scenarios to the workplace. We also have checking for understanding as the modules go on. They average 15 to 25 minutes apiece. And then we also have an assessment that's required of the employees to respond to that. Yes, you can click through, but you can't click through until each of the content from each of the slides is presented, and then you demonstrate the understanding of that. We do monitor that. That was for 23,000 plus employees, and actually we're at about 27,000 employees who have taken that training. We know them by name. We know where they work. We know when they completed it, and then we also know to prompt employees when they don't complete it, and we have progressive disciplinary measures if they don't complete it. I'm happy to say no one has lost their job because they didn't complete it. And initially, as we rolled it out, we would watch daily. The supervisors of each of the schools, principals of schools, supervisors of offices would get the rosters of employees, and then they would check. We would check centrally daily, and then as the year goes by, we check weekly because we do have new employees returning from leave. So we make sure they also receive the onboarding. That training happens before they go. They step into their jobs. So there is, while this is online, we do know we have a number of employees who aren't able to access this learning through the technology, or also our English language learners, and we have multiple face-to-face sessions as well for those employees to make sure everybody is knowledgeable about our expectations. Our office also is responsible for outreach and training, awareness, issue resolution. We do interventions and implementation support, and we communicate what the training is, when it's required, and what employee has to do, very clear on the employee requirements. The superintendent also elevated the Title IX coordinator position to be me as an executive staff member, an associate superintendent, to show the importance of that within the system, to elevate that. And then I also wanted to mention something that Councilmember Rice was talking about. You can give people training, but you don't know what's in their hearts. And we try to get at their hearts too, and that's through our mandatory cultural proficiency training. And that training is 3 hours, mandatory face-to-face. And again, speaking to, it's not with your computer, it's with your fellow workers, your colleagues, that you're talking about these important issues and what it means to truly create a positive workplace and a positive learning environment for students, because we know that we need to make sure the students feel like they're respected for their perspectives, their cultural perspectives, and they're not just valuable, but they are valued. So hearing from all of our employees and getting them to talk about it, because I think that's the first step. And then because we don't want the first time that they're talking about this is to a child and they're trying to understand the child. No, we have to be ready for that. So in tandem with the compliance training, we have the cultural proficiency training. We still have a lot of work to do, we know that, but that is a mandatory 3-hour face-to-face. And then we also have another hour of face-to-face mandatory training on implicit bias. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Getting the nod.
Thank you very much for that presentation. That was very helpful. Now to the college.
Thank you for the opportunity to brief you. My name is Vicki Duggan. I am the Chief Compliance, Risk, and Ethics Officer at Montgomery College. And you have our 12-page document in your packet with the details of our work to address and prevent harassment at Montgomery College with both employees and student groups. I want to highlight a few items in the report for you, but before I begin, let me share a little bit about my unique role at the college. The Compliance Office was established in 2012 to provide oversight and assure that Montgomery College is compliant to the laws and regulations governing higher education, including the protection against discrimination, harassment, and sexual misconduct. We have many people working at the college that do the day-to-day work of responding to allegations of sexual misconduct and harassment and the prevention of future acts. The Compliance Office's role is to assure that work is done and done well, and to coordinate with the various departments where there are shared responsibilities, and to have high-level oversight of regulatory compliance. My office staff includes the Title IX coordinator, who works on preventing student sexual misconduct, and the youth protection coordinator, who works on preventing sexual misconduct with our minors who visit our campus. So the college cares very, very much about our employees and students and are committed and strive to prevent harassment. And certainly compliance is just one bit of evidence to this commitment. So I'd like to just share a few items of highlight from our report, starting with training. All supervisors that are new are required to take a prevention of sexual harassment, workplace discrimination online training. All new faculty are required to take a sexual misconduct Title IX online training. All managers and supervisors in all divisions are required to take 2 classroom trainings. This is face-to-face training where on the topics of civility in the workplace and crucial conversations. These are aimed at preventing and addressing prohibited behavior. We are currently reviewing workplace harassment training in an effort to update content, frequency, specialization, and we will implement that and roll that out in this fall of 2018. And that will be scenario-based and have a lot of the relevancy for our environment. So on policies and procedures, the college's Board of Trustees approve college policy. The president and the leadership team craft and approve the associated procedures to operationalize and implement the policy. Dr. Pollard presides over a monthly meeting to review and enhance all policy and procedures or develop needed new policy and procedure. As you can see from our report, we have a very robust set of policies and procedures in place to prevent workplace harassment or address it, and that protects both employees and students. And enable reporting. We work on providing education and training as well as disciplinary procedures for those who have violated our policies and procedures. Employees have an array of reporting options, not limited to their supervisors, the Title IX coordinator, or the Director of Employee Labor and Relations. Additionally, the employees can contact and reach out to our ombuds, who provides guidance to employees about policies and procedures or options for them to report their concerns. We have updated our policies and procedures to enhance our efforts regarding the workplace environment. Last June, the Board of Trustees passed an employee code of ethics. That is now part of the Employee Code of Ethics program, and that part of that implemented an anonymous reporting line for employees to report misconduct, which my office oversees that line. In fall of 2017, the college also updated its prevention of workplace violence policy and procedure to include bullying. Just this month, we completed revisions to the equal opportunity and non-discrimination procedures to streamline the reporting process. Additionally, the college introduced a chief equity and inclusion officer to enhance our efforts in the arena of both our offices and our classrooms. So through our policies, our programs, and enforcement, Montgomery College is firmly committed to maintaining a working, learning, social environment in which the dignity and rights of all employees, students, and visitors are respected. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Duggan. And for our final presentation, the commission. And I apologize for your late placement in the agenda, and we will be needing to break momentarily, so.
We'll try to be succinct. I'm Casey Anderson, Chair of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. I have with me Patty Barney and our team from HR and Policy to answer any questions you may have. I will turn the mic over to Patty just for a brief summary, but I want to just touch on a couple things that I've heard that may be a little bit different or some similarities. The first is that, like the school system, we have policies against harassment that go beyond just the Title VII type of areas like race, gender, religion, national origin, and those categories that are established in the law to prohibit bullying, intimidation, harassment of all kinds. So employees have the right to and the opportunity to complain about that type of behavior and have them addressed through the HR process and the grievance process. It's been my observation that employees know that they can file grievances under the merit system, and they take advantage of that. And they also have, obviously, the opportunity to litigate claims that fall under other employment laws. But I think that they are, we have an environment where people are well aware that they have other mechanisms to get their concerns addressed if there are problems in the workplace. Second thing I've highlighted that is a little bit different than what I've heard from the other agencies is we're very proud of our Diversity Council, which is an entirely employee-led group. We give them time and resources. They are volunteer-based, but we let them take time during the workday. They do quite a lot of activities around things like African American History Month, Women's History Month. Those are the more visible things, but they also spearhead initiatives like there was a climate survey they recently completed. I think another one of the county agencies mentioned the role of climate surveys in trying to identify problems, and we take on board the employee-led ideas about what we can do to improve the environment and respect and celebrate diversity in the workplace. So obviously we'd be happy to answer any of your questions, but I wanted to turn to Patty if she wanted to cover anything that I had not addressed.
Thank you. For the record, Patty Barney, the Commission Executive Director, and our HR Director, Bill Spencer, is here, and Anju Bennett, the Corporate Policy Manager for Park and Planning. It's our pleasure to be here today. I will briefly go through a few items very similar to the other agencies. We are deeply committed to our policies related to non-discrimination in the workplace, no violence in the workplace, no sexual harassment of any kind. Our agency takes it very serious when we have complaints that come through. We have a number of ways for people to reach out in our complaints. In fact, some of them will just come through a hotline, even if it's Inspector General hotline, personnel complaints or those types of complaints will come through, and we will pass them through our HR Director. And whether they're handled at a department level, if they're a lower level issue, or at the HR Director, or sometimes if they're the highest level of complaint, we may pass them on to our Park Police if it's serious enough. And we take that process process very seriously, and our employees are educated on those policies. They're all in our materials. We have training, respectful workplace training that we thank the Montgomery College that helped us roll out for a number of years. In between those last trainings, which were face-to-face classroom settings, we had webinar type training, and now we're going to go back again and have the face-to-face training commission-wide. We want to do some updates based on latest trends and things that we need to revise that training on, so we're interested in that. We have other types of training that falls in this area. For example, ADA training. We have training on unconscious bias training. If you look at our response here, Parks recently trained 100+ managers on interviewer training. You think sometimes there's obstacles on how to recruit. Well, sometimes it takes place during the interview process, and you may not realize that's what's occurring, but they did provide training on how to have an appropriate interview process. Both Parks and Planning Department offer Leadership Institute training, and again, that focuses on a broad range of areas, but in particular, unconscious bias, leading diverse teams, how do you manage and work with a diverse workforce, and that training went through 2017. In addition, we had diversity training for the leadership teams in 2016 and 2017. As I mentioned, the agency takes this very seriously. We have a policy all about how you report, how we follow up, the timetables in which we do this, multiple outlets in which you can raise your complaint. You can go directly to the HR director, you can come directly to the executive director, and we will follow up as appropriate. In our packet, we lay out the types of policies that we have. Sometimes they can be overwhelming. There's so many pages. So I like to point to the one-page candy striper. We call it notice. It's a simple one for all employees to understand that cover equal employment and our prohibitions against unlawful discrimination, and particularly prohibitions against sexual harassment. So a one-page policy is something that most everybody can understand and relate to. Further in our packet, we go through our reporting and investigation process, and our chair mentioned we have a merit system board, so complaints can go through myself as executive director directly to the merit board if there's an adverse action of some sort. And we also have the collective bargaining process for grievances, which I sit and hear those particular complaints. And of course, employees are well aware in our policies that they may go outside of the agency to raise their complaints. And we have our statistics in our packet. I did want to make a couple comments to follow up on the Diversity Council, because I have the pleasure of working with the Diversity Council as the executive director. I'm really, over the last 9 years, they're on autopilot. I do very little. I sit there, try to provide support, a liaison between other departments, and in particular, as our chair mentioned, we do a survey every 3 years to really get the temperature of what's happening with diversity and inclusion, and where are we doing things well, where are we not doing things so well, and we use the results of that survey to develop the Diversity Council strategic plan. They present that to the commission. It's a well-received presentation. They identify the areas they would like to work through in the coming years, and we're at the end of our last 3-year strategic plan coming in December. We're getting ready to establish the new plan based on the survey we did in 2017, and the folks understand who the council is. When I first was executive director, folks didn't know who the Diversity Council was. We have a lot of materials that go out and communicate what we're all about, and it's been very well received and very well supported through all levels. But there are areas for us to work on, because remember, one of the comments in the survey was, well, some of the folks don't feel that they're really able to attend some of these educational sessions that we provide. So clearly we have to do a better job at making certain all levels understand they're welcome to attend our sessions throughout the year. And then some individuals feel that they don't need the training. And frankly, those are probably individuals that need the training the most. So we do have mandatory training, but we have some more work to do. And it's our pleasure again to be here. If you have any questions, we're pleased to be here to respond. Thank you for inviting us to this conversation. It's very important. And we are excited to hear your comments and your ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barney. Okay, we'll have one question or comment from Councilmember Rice.
Just very briefly, and I want to applaud you for your work when it comes to growing diversity of your workforce. I know that it is a challenge. In my work on the Chesapeake Bay Water Resource Policy Committee for COG, there's not a lot of, unfortunately, involvement with our communities of color and our environmental resources. But I will say this, that your linchpin to that, while all of those things are appropriate in terms of what you're doing, is seated right next to you, and that's MCPS and Montgomery College. And both of those entities reflect the diversity of our community. And so building a partnership with them to be able to ensure that that workforce comes directly to you is going to be imperative. And so educating children about the jobs, and I know, Casey, you've done that in terms of being more in the community and being a very visible force. I encourage you to do more of that and to have your staff and folks go out to schools and educate the children about what it is that you do, so that they can continue to be involved and engaged. And I know the work with TeenWorks and other programs like that and the partnerships that you've been able to solidify has helped to grow some of that. We just need to do more of that, and you'll continue to see that workforce continue to diversify and grow. So great work, keep it up, and utilize the great resources that we have. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Okay, really appreciate the work that you took to prepare today's presentations, and your materials have been provided to staff, and we will follow up. So thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate the dialogue.